Hey, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg.
And today we are reviewing Arydia, The Paths We Dare Tread by Far Off Games, or from Far Off Games.
And we dared to tread them.
Did we dare tread them?
We did dare tread them.
We've mostly tread them. We've gone through a decent portion of this game. We've played for probably something like 25 hours-ish, which from my understanding of the game is around halfway through the experience. Also because of that, there's not going to be a top-down camera in this because even though we reset something specifically to show you, I don't want to give you any spoilers to any kind of things at all. I'm being very, very spoiler cautious in this review. But we will loosely talk you through the experience, what it's like to play through Arydia, and then of course we will give our thoughts and opinions on it. You can also check out my original review of the prototype way back when I first played it, so if you want to check it, just type in Arydia Review Board Game Co. and you can see my original thoughts, as well as how they've changed and evolved after having played this for, again, halfway through-ish the campaign. But with that, let's go ahead and give you a very brief overview of the game experience. Again, if you want more on how to play Arydia, you can check that out from a variety of other channels. This is going to be much more, and actually my old review, you can probably check it out there. I probably had a decent amount of how to play in there. But for right now, the general idea is Arydia is a board game RPG. You are playing as a bunch of characters, or well, depending on your player count, you can control a single character each, you can have all 4 characters, you can have 2 characters each, you can do whatever you want as far as the characters in the game, but you're going to have these characters that are going on these adventures. These adventures are going to take place on this overland map. This over here is the basin. Is it a basin? It's the basin. The basin. This over here is the basin, and you're going to start off... We flipped over all the tiles. Over here.
No.
Yes,
Oh,
making
okay.
sure. So we start off over here. We specifically flipped over all of them so we can show you flipping one, and that way you can see how this structure works as far as flipping these tiles. But you're going to track where your group is, but then you can slowly start wandering around the board after you go through the tutorial of the game. You can slowly start wandering around the board and exploring the world of Arydia and seeing what all these other tiles have. Now on these tiles, you probably can't see it from that far away, but on these tiles there are individual areas which you can dive into. That's where you have these boards. Again, I'm showing you the very starting board to avoid any spoilers, but you have these boards that you can dive into. You read the back of the board, the Exiles Camp, that's set up over there on the first tile, and then you can go onto this board where you can then start engaging with the various characters. This is where all the various decks, giant decks full of cards, will come into play, because you'll have things like events and persons of interest and points of interest and all these different things you can engage with in the world around you. You see, you have the overland map, you have the individual part where your character is going to be walking around the board and exploring and engaging with the various characters and all the things you see, but then at times you'll also have enemy spawning. This is where the game moves into its third tier, its third level, which is a bit more of a dungeon crawl exploration, which can take place on the same level as tier 2. Like, I think of it as like the overworld, the people you're engaging with, and then the actual combat and fighting, which is the dungeon crawl aspect. Although again, those 2 second tiers can happen on the same level playing field, so to speak. Like, there's times where you're wandering into an actual basement and having a dungeon crawl, and there's times where you wander into a camp, and before you know it, blank shows up, and you have to fight blank while talking to the blank after, because they had an encounter with the blank as well. Like I said, this is a spoiler-free review. You would say anything?
No, I don't know.
So, past that, you're going to be engaging in the combat level. So, when you have the overland board, you're kind of wandering around. When you have the individual talking people, it's all about the exploration, the encounters, and it's going to have a degree of how you communicate and how you engage leads into different things. So I might talk to the bartender, and if I talk to the bartender, they might tell me about someone off all the way to the west, and when I go to the west, I can reference the bartender and then have a conversation and play out differently because of different things that happened. The game does this through the use of these keys that you can unlock in different ways for a variety of things. It might be a literal key that opens a door, it might be a rock that plugs into a wall and rotates the entire universe into a kind of Lost-like situation, I don't know.
Spoiler alert.
Or it might be, no spoilers, I'm making all this up. I'm making all, well, past the fact there's actual keys. Or it might be literally just the fact that you now have a piece of information that represents the key when you engage with somebody else. And so it has this degree of dynamic ways that things play out. If you've played games like Sleeping Gods, if you've played games like, what else is there? What else do like Sleeping Gods? Tainted Grail. If you play games like Tainted Grail, there has that aspect where the world kind of remembers what you're doing based on the encounters you have with it, and the order in which you engage with things will matter. The game also does lean into the role-playing aspect, where you're going to have these characters, and you can literally go through an aspect where you're playing as the gruff guard, and you're like, hey, yeah, you bunch of squills and the exiles, and you're going to be wandering off to the camp over there, and what do you think about that? And then the other person can then go ahead and say...
Oh gosh, squills. What about squills?
Squills are a measure of how we reward those yawn exiles and help them through. You basically have a degree of role playing where you can go through what a character's doing, reading a card, and the other person can pick up on those hints, those keywords, ask you about the camp, the exiles, the why are you talking with that rough voice over there, whatever it is. And you can do this either thematically, trying to immerse yourself into the role playing aspect, or you can do so a little less, like a little more mechanically, and literally just read the prompts on the cards. Either way is up to you. I personally have fun with the role playing aspect, but if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. Although the game does reward you with role-playing points. Points that you can use to give a +3 modifier to any roll if you choose to go along with the task that the game is giving you in, I don't know, letting loose a little bit, having a little bit of fun as you play through the experience. That's the basic arc of what you're doing here. You have this loose kind of sense of why you're doing what you're doing. You're trying to redeem yourself as you wander around this world. But past that, you're literally just exploring, leveling up, gathering more gear, and fighting. Speaking of fighting, we haven't talked about fighting a lot, but characters have, and again, I can't show you all this stuff right now, but characters have these boards full of gear and equipment. And a big part of the way the game works is enemy cards have these points of damage, and your weapons have different ways that they deal damage and in different patterns. And it's up to you to try to figure out the right pattern of how to use different weapons and skills in combination with each other to be the most efficient as far as landing blows on the enemies and taking them down, hopefully more efficiently before they kill you, because they often do try to kill you in this game. They're very good at killing you. Fortunately, the game has this like kind of mechanic where you can revive at the last minute and get a last shot, and if it wasn't for that, I'd be dead so many times in this game, I wouldn't even be able to count it.
Yeah, the combat and weapon system is pretty cool. That to just, I think, kind of explain it a little bit. For example, one of your weapons might do an attack that hits a certain point, and then if you roll well enough, it will strike down, you know, like 3 points down. But the enemy's health could be 3 points sideways, so even though you're striking down, you're only actually hitting 1 point of damage because their health goes that way. So it is very tricky with how you puzzle around the points of damage you're doing with the weapons that you're using for it.
But with that, we're going to dive into our general thoughts, because that's a brief kind of overview of this large RPG adventure that we're playing here. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into our actual thoughts on the experience. And this is going to be a bit of a freeform. I don't know if we'll even do what we like and don't like, so much as just generally talking about things. Because there's so much, contrary to many reviews we do on the channel, there's so much to talk about here that I just want to start talking about things. And so let's start off. Pick anything you like or don't like, and let's just start there.
Okay. Well, I have two things that are kind of related. And my first is that I feel like the players are very well taken care of in the sense of what you get as your player with your character. So I think there are a lot of games like this that are more focused on either just the general combat in the world and what you're doing in the scenario, but you don't get that much as a player. And in this one, I'm trying to be spoiler free, but you unlock these different skills that you get, and they have branching pathways sometimes depending on the skills that you choose. But the board that it comes on, and even how nicely you can track that and the way they punch out, is so nice to have as a player for your full like complement of what you get, on top of like how great the player boards are. And you get a deck of cards that explains all of those different skills to you and exactly how you're able to use them and you know, different situations, and it answers almost every question you could possibly have when you're not sure how to do something with them. So I think that it really does stand out in this game. Oh, and the other thing I want to say about being spoiled as a player is that, remind me because it was a while ago, but the heads pop off and you can choose your race with your class, correct?
Maybe.
I believe the heads come off.
So do I. I'm trying to pull it off right now.
I know. Now I'm scared.
No, it definitely
but I
does.
believe
There we
you
go.
can. Yeah, so you can mix and match your class and your race and insert the heads. That was just my phone. So yeah, I just think you get so much as a player that you're given a lot that you feel really cool and taken care of, and that it is about you and your team and your journey as opposed to the focus being just the game itself.
Yeah, I do want to hit upon that because you mentioned the tutorial system, kind of. Well, not even the tutorial. I'll come to the tutorial in a second. But you have this deck of cards which represents all these skills your character has, and everyone has all the rules you might need. Because when you're playing the game, you might sit there and say, wow, I wish the rulebook had this information. Because sometimes the rulebook doesn't. Instead, they gave you a deck of cards that every single skill, everything your character needs to access is on these cards with a little FAQ on the back, little rules how it works on the front. It is such a clean system as far as not having players have to like argue or back and forth forth. Can you pass me the rulebook, Mag? I need to check on my character. No, you actually
just like
you pass,
it's like Pavlov.
Like the idea that you're passing the rulebook back and forth as you try to figure out what your stuff does, you don't have that. You just have it all on a deck of cards that makes the game incredibly accessible. And from there, I'll talk about the tutorial. The tutorial does a very good job of guiding you through the experience. I like learn and play type of tutorials, games that kind of guide you through it by saying, hey, your character's doing this, now do this. Normally, right now, you'd roll a die, but let's pretend you got a 4 instead. Like, this game has that aspect where it kind of guides you into the mechanics bit by bit through a tutorial, making it so the rulebook, you do want to read the rulebook, but you can kind of get to it when you get to it. Like, I did finish the rulebook by now, but I probably started playing through the game before fully finishing the rulebook because I just didn't need to. Granted, once in a while, you'll hit that thing where you're like, oh, you've been doing that wrong, but it works out overall. The tutorial does a great job, the cards do a great job, and so the game does do an excellent job of guiding you into a system that has a lot going on with fairly little hassle relative to other games of its ilk.
And I think another thing that players get, just talking about like how cool it is to be a player in the game, again, I think this is spoiler free, everyone gets a chest.
Yes.
That is your own secret things you get to unlock.
Yes.
So that's what I'll say. But like different things in the story, all of a sudden it's like, ooh, open your chest.
If at any point you hear bleeps or things go wrong, it means we said something that wasn't safe to say.
So every now and then you have your own like little personal thing of things that you will get something from. And that's also just pretty cool that you know you have that you're working toward it. And yeah, it's a fun moment when you're a player.
Although I'll actually use that to segue into something I don't like with the game.
Okay.
Because one of the things I haven't loved is the slowness of the gear. I think it's the gear specifically more so than the skills, but honestly it's a little bit of both. Yeah. I think the progression of your character in this game is significantly slower than I would like. Meaning I do find that combat, the way combat works, the exploration with the overworld, I'll talk about all those things I like there soon, but I do find that the actual combat sequencing, as much as I appreciate the system for what it's doing and how unique it is compared to anything else out there, pros in that camp, I do think that after enough combats, and the way the combat works in this game is not only do you have a combat, but very often you have ways to re-encounter those types of enemies. So if you're hunting down, I don't know, giant cockroaches or who knows what, you might have a sequence later in the game where you now can hunt down those giant cockroaches as a kind of side job that you're given. And it's a nice way that the game kind of lets you engage with the same enemies multiple times as opposed to having them just either once. The tricky part is the pacing of the game means that you're kind of engaging with the same enemies a few times more in rapid succession. Not necessarily rapid succession, but like I might engage with a handful of enemies in a repeated process. I might go through that arc of trying to figure out how to use my gear and skills against them. But I do find that the combat sequences tend, at least for me, they tend to feel a little repetitive relative to the pace at which I'm getting something new or cool. The amount of times in this game I've been frustrated, I'm like, I just want my new gear piece over here. I just want something cooler. And there is cool gear to unlock, but I think the part of the problem I have is a lot of the gear is so static on its level. There's almost like 3 tiers. There's like, the basic intro tier. There's the next tier up, which is a hodgepodge of different things that some are better than others, but they kind of fall into this general umbrella. And then there's like the super cool stuff you could unlock. But that doesn't mean that once you get like your first cool thing or two, you're just trying to even out your person overall, getting all the gear, all the armor. And I didn't feel the level of gear progression that I would want in a game of this ilk.
So I think what the problem might exactly be, which I kind of got the sense, is that they do have you go through a tutorial where it's like, you've never even fought before. And then after that, you're, becoming someone that's clearly just walking around getting into these scuffles on your own. And in the beginning, everything is called practice whatever. Yeah. So I think that if it didn't have that on it, I don't know if mentally I would associate it so much with, like, my training wheels are still on. If it had just been called, like, the blank, knife instead of practice knife. I feel like with practice gear so far in, it does feel a little,
So I don't disagree that adds to it for me, but I think for me it's more about this general arc. I find that as we've gone through combats, different enemies require different people to specialize. Like, your weapon strikes up, my weapon strikes this way, so this enemy you're better at hitting. But I do find that I've fallen into a lot of patterns in combat where I'm like, I do this, you do that. We sit there and we build up enough of our combo power in order for that character to use their skill because their skill is the best skill, and we'll kind of group things. Like I have found that we are falling into patterns that I wish weren't true. And it's worth, not wish weren't true, wish weren't as consistent. And it's worth mentioning as well, because you might think, oh, well, it's only relevant to a 2-player experience, but we're actually kind of playing a 3-player sort of, because we each have our own character, but we want to see how it feels, so we comboed up another character as well, which does play pretty decently overall.
Yeah.
But it does mean that even with 3 players, or 3 players at the table, so to speak, we're still falling into, at least I feel, we're falling into patterns.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't know if I have much more to say about that, but I don't disagree.
Yeah. I will say, as far as the things I like on the Overland world, because again, we have this giant map over here. Oh, well, actually, I'm going to talk about things we like and don't like. This is going to have all kinds of stuff in here. I love this system of this Overland world. I love the sense of the exploration you get, and the way that this world, which at first feels very small, like you start punching out the first few tiles, you're like, wow, this game's going to be over in like 5 hours. But no, it does slow down very quickly, and it takes more and more time to grow out, and the game starts letting you do more and more things, and there's times where you kind of want to loop back on yourself as you go through it. So overall, this is a very satisfying experience, mostly.
Well, and looking at the map, it seems like you can get to everywhere, but like this is not somewhere you can just get to, and to get up to here, you actually have to go around to there. So it does get a little bit trickier to go to certain places.
Yeah. But I will say, again, pro and con over here. My con for this area is going to be that, again, somewhat pattern-wise, the game kind of has it so that you have this travel mechanic in the game, which, first of all, is just kind of random as far as when you can travel and not be penalized, when you have to use up your spirit to overcome various threats or whatnot that happen along the journey. But then I do find that it's not hard for you to just kind of get stuck and have to return to a base level. So it's kind of like this slow spread out and then return somewhere where you can recharge. Slow spread out, return somewhere you can recharge. And from a game mechanic, as far as forcing the players to, return to base and level up and get jobs and all those things, I think it works great there. But from a stance of me just kind of feeling a little bit like, I don't know, I guess I do sometimes feel like the weary traveler in this game, which makes sense thematically, but mechanically I'm kind of here to have fun and do cool stuff, and so having to constantly be like, oh, it's time to return to base, let's hope we don't get too hit by things on the way back as we have no more spirit to deal with all the consequences, that kind of rubber band effect and pulling you back, again, starts to add to the repetition aspect of the game as opposed to the parts that I enjoy.
Yeah, I agree with that there were definitely times where it would be more interesting and more fun to do the thing that was just uncovered. But instead, you look around and you're like, we just got to walk all the way back to heal and then walk all the way back to then do the encounter. So I do think that, and again, this might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I think that the map was a little bit frustrating. I was trying to locate certain places that would be helpful, and because of the travel mechanic, you're kind of forced to just go back when you're not landing in certain areas and you're not finding the things that you need. So, yeah, I think that I definitely thought I was going to find more options within the map, and then it turns out it's pretty difficult to venture out and that you do need to go back and heal pretty often.
Not to mention that it does feel like the game tries to give you the premise of an open world journey, but in reality, the game kind of directs you where you're supposed to be going at different points, like different elements. Like, oh, there's a tribe off east, they might be helpful, and you're like, I'm going to go west because the game lets me. You can do that. You'll then wander up in a group of level enemies that are significantly higher than your level, and you will very quickly die. So it gives you the premise of the open world, but in reality, you do find yourself needing to follow the prompts. Now, that does get better the further you go into the game, because the further you go into the game, now that you've leveled up a bit, you can start having more agency. Do I want to go back to that job posting over there? Do I want to go to that village? Do I want to go back down there because there was a key that I got, and I think it referenced something over there? So it does feel a bit more open world the more you explore, but especially early on, it's on rails, and even as you continue to go through it, there's definitely an arc you're trying to follow here with some degree of choice as far as what you interact with. Like, there definitely have been times where, for one reason or another, we didn't go to one specific area that might have been a bit more prompt, and then we came back to it later, we're like, oh, that was who they wanted. They would have let us into the city if we did that. Like, we have had those moments. So, and I like that, by the way. I like the fact, I guess this is both a pro and a con and a pro. It's a pro in that it's an open world. It's a con in that it's kind of a little more directed than the game might seem at first. And it's a pro in the sense that it's not so directed that there are certainly times where the way you interact with one thing or another will have different outcomes. Like, I remember mentioning even way back in my original review how charmed I was by like this one encounter where if you talked to a boy a certain way, you found out information, and if you didn't, you didn't. And I love that little encounter. Just like the fact that you can miss out on this thing, this entire aspect of the game, not entire aspect of the game, you can miss out on what this knowledge this boy had just depending on the way you communicate them. And I like it when a game does that, and this does that a lot. So it definitely is. I don't want to pretend it's on rails. I also don't want to pretend it's open world. It's a little bit of a mix of both.
something that I would say, I think that, well, I have like maybe 2 more points.
Go for it.
But one thing that I would really like to say is that keeping this spoiler free as possible, I feel like everything I say is going to start with that. The class that I mainly played in this, I have played in D&D. So I've played them in both types of games, and I would say that the combat system... In the combat system, you not only have your weapons and your gear and things like that, but you have your different skills, and you're using those and the combo points that you get to do major and minor actions. And I really do truly feel, being so close with the D&D class that I know, I played it for a very long time, it does feel very, very similar. It feels like you're doing things that aren't just attacking and combat or whatever. It feels like that class and what it should be maneuvering like. So I would just say that, as broadly as possible, is that I think that they did hit the nail on the head with the different skills and how they synergize with each other and how it actually makes it feel like a class that's doing something different as opposed to just like, I hit, you know, and things like that. Yeah, I do really like the class system of how it all works.
Yeah. And speaking of that, the leveling up system is excellent. The way the leveling up works in this game is you have 2 different tiers of attributes, so to speak. If I have a card somewhere,
I grabbed one.
There we go, perfect. We have our health, mana, and spirit, which is one class of tiers, and then we have strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, and endurance. And those are the different areas. But the way when you level up in the game is you effectively pick one from each of those groups, and you go straight to that level. So, for example, if you're playing as a character that wants their strength, all your weapon as like, you know, referencing your strength here. Well, you could just up your strength each time you level up, but then your other stats are going to be far behind. But let's say you hit level 4 and you're like, you know what, today I'm going to go ahead and bump up my dexterity instead. Your strength will stay at level 3, but your dexterity will go straight from 0 all the way to 4, which results in this interesting dynamic where you're kind of somewhat incentivized to lean into the things your character wants the most to give you those stat boosts, those higher rolls and all that. But if you are willing to diversify just a little bit, you get a whole lot of diversity bumping when that happens. And I really like that system because it forces you... It first of all gives you a lot at times. Like, again, you hit a new level, you're like, I got 6 more points in something.
I pushed this system to the limit, I think.
In terms of just trying... Oh, yeah, you...
I really did. I don't want to, like, spoiler and say, I don't know.
That's not a spoiler, that's just tactical.
I stayed at 1 health for as long as I possibly could. I stayed at 1 health. And I just bumped everything else up instead, and I don't know, I survived.
This is not a tactic I recommend. Her specific character leans into it with skills.
I think people, even if you're purchasing this, you should know what classes there are. So I played as the rogue. So, you know, I'm rogue, I'm sneaky, Path of Shadow, and yeah, I stayed with 1 health for a very long time.
Going invisible on a regular basis helps you stay alive a lot as you go through it.
And having a 3rd player.
You mentioned you had 2 more points you want to go, or 1 more?
Oh yeah, and my other thing is that this was going back to it taking care of the players, also taking care of everyone as a whole when trying to be like a DM-less type game. With how these punch out, and especially how your the different secret things that you uncover punch out, there's a really cool system of how you look for the tokens. Nothing is spoiled. You really have no concept of what things are going to pop out until you pop them out. And on top of that, the point I really wanted to make was the enemy system. For the enemies, it's almost like an advent calendar. So there's a box, and they're all numbered, but you have no idea what's inside. So even when you're grabbing the ones that you need, you don't know what's around it, and you don't know what you're going to encounter until you're encountering it. So I just think that was really, really cool, and I appreciate that little touch, that I think that it really took a game and made it DM-less and kept as many surprises, even for the people setting up and things like that. Yeah.
And for me, I guess the last thing I'll just focus on in general, I kind of touched upon at different points, is I like the world building aspect a lot. The way the characters have this story that's going on, things that you're engaging with. Again, we're not going to talk about all the details, but you start to get to know these characters. Characters get replaced. There's a whole system, again, almost, I guess, a pro and a con again, where you kind of have this almost feels like a video game at times, where you get to like talk to your character, and then because you've now advanced, you now replace their card with a new card. So when you come back to them, you now have no information. And so you go to a different city, and then it tells you to replace that first card, because now that you've gone to a different city, when you come back, guild leader Theros is going to talk to you about something else instead. And so you have all these things happening where the game is giving you different tiles, different cards, different points of interest. They're updating the game as you go through it, bless you. They're updating the game as you go through it based on the encounters you're having. And so it does a great job at that world building, which is the pro. And at times, and I know, like I said this way back in my first review, I've seen it said by others, at times this does beg the question, okay, well, at what point do you just want to play a video game? This does such a good job emulating that experience, but with a bit more homework and tediousness that it's a question of, okay, great, like, is the homework and tediousness worth it? Is the world building, like, there? It's, again, and for me, it's a little bit of both. I think it does a great job. I am invested and immersed in the world that it's creating, and then at times it can be a little, like, frustrating when you're like, oh, here's a key I have, and it says, when you find this text, and I'm like, I don't know if we've seen that text.
Right.
I may have seen that text. I may have talked to 14 characters. Do I now riffle through all the characters trying to find it? Like, there's pros and cons to a system this intricate. Which I guess, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we talked about it before, and since we're not doing the regular format, I just wanted to go back to one thing, is that for me, the NPC system of role-playing and reading cards didn't hit the way... I didn't love it. So that's the only thing I'll say, is that for me, it did feel, I would say, a little bit cheesy at times.
Yes.
And sometimes it feels like you're just trying to emphasize the bolded words so that you're like, okay, which 4 words did I hear that sound the most unique that I should say? Okay, tell me about the lizards then. So for me, some of it was charming and some of it was fun, especially when it was story points that we really cared about. But sometimes it just felt like, you know, well, there's a museum over there where someone might purchase some fish from the lake.
Tell me more about the fish, Meg.
Well, the fish are down by the lake.
Lake, you say?
Oh, the Lake of Valor. If you go down eastward, you'll be sure to find the lake.
What am I missing? What am I missing? I mean, this honestly, this is completely accurate. I don't disagree with you. I love the system, and maybe I love the system because I don't like RPGs. I don't like that when an RPG forces me to play a role, and I kind of have to, like, make everything up myself, I feel cheesy about it. Versus when the card's saying, like, oh, talk in a squeaky voice as a little, like, I don't know, a goblin person. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. You've decided I'm going to be cheesy and campy. Let's be cheesy and campy. I just came back from the fields, and in the fields I saw this great swooping shadow overhead.
Yeah, this was the game that we learned I don't know what suave means.
I like the cheesiness and campiness, but I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Anyways, with that, final thoughts. Where are you on Arydia, the Paths We Dare Tread?
So for me, for Arydia, just to quickly run down, there are some things that I'm going to start off with the things I didn't love, which is, you know, it was a little bit cheesy. It did feel a little bit grindy. I don't love moving around this map, but I love interacting on the bigger maps. But that being said, I really do appreciate and enjoy the combat system. I love the gear system. I do wish there was cooler gear, but I do love the gear system. I love the leveling up system, and I love the skills that you get and that you can pay into. And I also love the brightness of it, that this isn't even one that's, like, cutesy or anything like that. It's all still very, I don't know, classic medieval, what have you, but it's very bright still. Like, even these maps, like, it's just yellow and it's just terrain, but it's still pretty beautiful. So, overall for me, I'm going to rate it at a 4.0. I really, really enjoy games like this. I wish it hit a little bit harder, but I'm really, really liking it.
For me, I am coming in a little bit higher, but it has gone down a bit for me the more I've played it. My original ranking of Arydia was a 5 out of 5. I love this game. I was obsessed with it, and part of that is that I had played the first, like, 3 hours of the experience, and going through it more has definitely let some of that grind aspect show a bit. Again, the going back and forth on that overland map, not seeing the development of my characters as fast relative to the experience I'm having. And so I still very much enjoy this game. I think that it's an excellent experience, giving you a very solid RPG with a lot of intuitive elements, a combat system that is very unique, a general degree, multiple levels of world building that all tie in very nicely with each other. For me, I'm coming in at a 4.5 out of 5. That ding does come through primarily in those semi-grind aspects, where the more I play this game, the more I find myself appreciating the the more I play this game, the more I find myself appreciating the story and the world, and the more I find myself getting slightly, not annoyed is the wrong word, but less enamored with the mechanical aspects of the game, and that's where I've seen myself see a little dip in the experience, but still coming in high at a 4.5 out of 5.
I would say if you play RPGs, I highly recommend this. If you're someone that enjoys the classes and RPGs and things like that, I do highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah. As far as game recommendations, if you like Arydia the Paths We Dare Tread, you might like
Agamonia. Agamonia is very similar, where you're exploring through a world. It's very bright, and it's pretty cute.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's a good one.
I very much agree with Agamonia. I said it back in my original review. It's still true today. But because you've chosen that, I will go with Lands of Evershade. Lands of Evershade to me is another RPG-esque board game in a box that, again, very similarly operates on multiple levels in terms of the way the game operates as, again, overland story, the individuals, the dungeon crawlers, has a very similar arc while managing to be very, very different as far as experiences go. I have to imagine that if you enjoyed one, you would probably at least enjoy the other. How much is a different question.
But you have to wait for that one.
You do have to wait for that. That's a prototype. I mean, it's not out yet. This is Agamonia. We actually just got new stuff for Agamonia. You don't even know about that. New stuff showed up. Anyways, that is your review for Arydia: The Path We Dare Tread. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co.
I'm Professor Meg.
And have a good one.
Bye.